So again, folks, I just want to remind you that this is um, my kind of in-depth analysis and take on it. The majority of content and things that I do is really related to true crime, but in this case, I felt impressed to do this on this video game, Resident Evil. This game character, and this is my professional, personal take on it. And I'll be doing more, related to games, related to specifically video games and things, when there's really time to do that, for sure. But this is a very important kind of retrospective I did on Resident Evil. And the things that I say about Leon Kennedy, uh, a lot of people are not going to be familiar with because they may not have paid close attention to the actual storyline. But these are very important things. And I'm pointing out how, over the course of the games, he does change between, I believe, Resident Evil 3 and Nemesis and so on. He does change and shift somewhat. He doesn't stay stoic. But in any case, everything I say is going to apply. So pay close attention. Thank you. All right, so as promised, folks, this is essentially my kind of first level in depth analysis of none other than Resident Evil's Leon S. Kennedy. I'm doing an official character profile on him because I feel that there is a lot of importance to doing this. A lot more than might seem to be there at first glance. But essentially, and this is one of the reasons why I've always really liked playing Resident Evil, is I wanted to learn firsthand, really, really deeply learn about some of these characters. And Leon Kennedy is a perfect example of a character who a lot of people need to know more things about. And so I like being given this opportunity with you guys before we do an upcoming live chat where I will go over more of the smiley face murders and similar things that are of real importance today. It teaches someone a lot, and I mean a lot more than they would learn otherwise, when they study certain video game characters, and particularly in Resident Evil, the study of Leon S. Kennedy is a good example. So I'm going to basically surmise what some people are aware of, but a lot of people do not know. Leon S. Kennedy is one of the starring characters in the Resident Evil series. He has crashed everything from a airliner jet to a regular squad car more than 5 separate times. He has also crashed a cycle more than 4 separate times during the course of the series. Leon S. Kennedy was sent to the island, kind of where Resident Evil takes place, by a detective named Ark Thompson, who I've learned a lot about as the series has progressed, and I would define him as a corrupt detective at minimum. And that's why I was interested in really kind of exploring the deeper layers of characters when it comes to the Resident Evil series. And some people would be like, but Thompson, did this and that. Listen, I don't need to get into all that with everybody or ever start an argument for that matter. I'm an American state national, you know. I recognize and understand how things truly are on the whole. And most of these police, not all, but I mean a lot in certain jurisdictions, are totally corrupt and are unwilling to change. You got corrupt detectives all around, and Art Thompson is one of those. Now, don't get me wrong, folks. I know some good detectives. I know some really good people that are there, all right? But a huge amount of them are, in fact, corrupt, which really is kind of going along the lines with what I'm saying about Leon S. Kennedy that people need to be aware of. He was sent there by Art Thompson. Art Thompson did not have good motives for apparently going to the island where Resident Evil takes place. He crashed more than 3 squad cars. Now, let me paraphrase this. He also knew this guy named Schrader or something. He was kind of a ex-Navy SEAL type of person. So I can see and get a hint of where some of the characteristics really rubbed off on Leon Kennedy. So I don't believe at all, based on the overall story, that Leon Kennedy started out as a corrupt cop. Okay? There are a number of those out there, you know, for sure, in these professions. And I can even relate to the example where that certain times I've been a corrupt cop, but not in the way that someone would want to think that that term is defined. Meaning, when I bring that up, I'm saying I pretend is the key word to use, folks, in certain situations to be a corrupt cop in a bid to be able to gain all of the inside information and knowledge that otherwise is not going to be available. Okay? But I, particularly myself and friends of mine, have never actually subscribed to that and have never been corrupt cops like that. But in a bid to be able to get information, that was, you know, kind of an act that was performed. I can tell you, based upon a lot of investigation and evidence, that Leon S. Kennedy, and I'm not saying that there's that many in the real world. There are numbers of them in certain cities, but certainly in Resident Evil, in the series Resident Evil in fiction, there's a lot more corrupt detectives than there are in the real world. I'll just tell you that right off the bat. And so Leon S. Kennedy exhibited a wanton disregard for Sherry on multiple occasions when he kind of arrived and started going through the biohazard unit. There was at least 2 or 3 different times where he could have done something to protect Sherry, the father of Sherry, also the brother that was there. And Leon Kennedy did not intervene. In fact, he crashed the squad car a total of 3 times. And this is something that people, you know, need to be made aware of, as they may not know about it from not really paying attention to you got to really pay attention to Resident Evil story, is what I can say here. Leon Kennedy ignored certain directives when he got into the bioweapons lab. Like, he wanted to, for some reason, with this whole thing with Schrader, you can see here, he has an interesting relationship he's always hidden regarding what happened with Schrader. He wanted to kind of use it as leverage to puff himself up at a certain point during Resident Evil's story. And this is another reason why I see that Chris Redfield doesn't trust him, doesn't trust Leon, you know. And Later on, he kind of goes the other direction and stays a certain distance away from any past memories of Schrader and drops Ada Wong, which I think was one of the better parts of the later storyline, because that was not conducive to a good relationship. I'm sorry, I don't think Leon Kennedy being around Ada Wong is really serviceable for him as a character in the long run. There are certain times during the series when Leon Kennedy has done the right thing, and he helped out Janet. He helped out this other woman who was there at the lab, but there's so many occasions where he kind of ignored it and just looked the other way. I find it pretty much a given. I'm going to call Leon Kennedy a corrupt cop in this video for the purpose of exploration of the character. Now, later on, he apologizes for having wrecked a 747 airliner and literally blowing up 2 helicopters, and I think getting more than 10 different squad mates killed, essentially. But he starts off, folks, if you want to look at it like that, because of his ties to Art Thompson, he just starts off as being kind of this corrupt cop character who you don't really know much about one way or the other. You can't predict what his next move is going to be. Okay? And I'm not going to make that derogatory because I have a friend who is a little bit like that, who I'm actually kind of close to, but he has reformed himself considerably over time. And at some point I'll be able to definitely connect with him again. He's mostly a good person now, but he wasn't always. And so I take that kind of into the mode of discussion here, because Leon S. Kennedy is like that, but he's very much exaggerated. He's an exaggerated version of that. He kind of wanted to help them get rid of the bioweapons facility, but he wanted to get all the credit for having gotten rid of the facility. He wanted to have his name on some of the products in the facility. And I don't like that, And my best friend is pretty much on the same page. He doesn't like that either. It makes Leon Kennedy kind of the opposite of Chris Redfield. He's more of a always switching decisions and sides kind of character. So if I was Chris Redfield, I wouldn't want to trust Leon Kennedy the current way he is either, most of the time. But thankfully, you see there is a lot of growth in Leon Kennedy's character. And this is just the first video I'm kind of really doing on the Resident Evil series, so there'll be more to say. But by Resident Evil 4, he's kind of left this ridiculous show-off mentality behind, more or less, and he's much more of a straight shooter. He has no connections to Art Thompson. He's not trying to put his name on the bioweapons lab, or even worse, get a sample of the bioweapons material to be able to help one of his family members, which I found just atrocious. His character has really developed and changed a huge amount by Resident Evil 4. And so I feel like he started out really as truly a corrupt cop wanting to use more or less Rebecca Chambers, and Rebecca would use him in certain places, but not the same way. and also wanting to use Ada Wong and take the samples for himself for some ulterior motive, for some other ridiculous purpose. But by Resident Evil 4, I can admit he's more or less a straight arrow cop. He's a good cop. A good average cop, not a great cop, okay? But he still, and this is what I want to point out to everybody, especially the youth, he still crashes more than 4 helicopters. So, and I'm not pointing out that he remains the same kind of character. I think that overall he goes through some structural changes as the series progresses. And in Resident Evil 4, like I said, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and that he no longer has any connections to Ark Thompson, who's just kind of a corrupt detective. And even though he does crash 4 helicopters, he does his best to save Sherry's family. He does turn around his character in a way that would make him more of a supportable, good cop by Resident Evil 4's timeline. But he still tries to manipulate, the detective and the other person that they meet on the island. And he shows little concern at all or remorse for some reason for allowing the crazy dwarf-like character, and I forget his name right now, it's like Archimedes or something, that's on that island to wreak absolute havoc because he's thinking at the time he's going to get a sample, to be able to put his name on the sample or something. But finally, by the midway point, and even though, it isn't that much, Leon Kennedy changes his ways and puts a stop to what's going on there and makes it a priority over himself. So I would concur with the fact that he does turn into more of a good cop at that point by the time Resident Evil 4 is happening. And I could say that he's more of an exaggerated version of one of my friends who would never be quite exactly like Leon Kennedy. But at the same time, he has had his moments as well. And so I understand it, and I'm able to understand and empathize with it. But the fact is, he's the opposite of Chris Redfield because Leon Kennedy chooses to do things his own way. He's very much unpredictable. And he allows the maniac who's on the Resident Evil 4 island, at least at first, to get away with all the things that he's doing because he's trying to manipulate the detective there, and he ends up crashing an airliner. And then he crashes also a helicopter. So he causes a lot of damage. I think it was well over $3 million worth of damages. He changes in that he doesn't want to have his name just on the samples that they take from the island and so on. But my main problem, my main point of this analysis is he doesn't really change his ways as far as manipulating Ada Wong and similar people, even in Resident Evil 4. He's still kind of the same ridiculous character. And I know it's very exaggerated, but even my best friend agrees that he's still just such a flip-flopping character that you don't really believe you can trust Leon Kennedy due to the fact that he does switch sides often. And Chris Redfield is the exact opposite. He's a rock. He never changes sides. He never changes decisions. In nearly all of the cases of the latter part of the Resident Evil series, he's always consistent with what he chooses to do. But Leon, he's a very big fan favorite, And so I didn't want to make this out to be like too hard on the character. But by the end of Resident Evil 4, he's also destroyed a whole base and all the people inside there and showed wanton disregard for all the lives that were sacrificed and so on. So he still has some real rough edges at that point. But I feel like Leon Kennedy redeems himself towards the end of Resident Evil 4 because he forgets any of his past with Schrader. And Schrader was a very, very bad person in this series. I think he was probably one of the worst villains in Resident Evil, at least in my opinion, aside from Albert Wesker. So when he gets away from that and he just throws away his memory of Schrader, I can respect the fact that Leon Kennedy does create a lot of good in the world and destroys the bioweapons lab and doesn't do it to get his name in the news. He just does it because it's the right thing. But he kind of comes along after Chris Redfield, and that's why I will say Chris Redfield would definitely always be my number one pick, because Chris is always consistent. He always is looking out for Claire. He's always looking out for the people there, and he does not ever flip-flop on his decisions. So I would always appreciate that about them, but I do enjoy Leon Kennedy's character as well. Even though, realistically, what I'm saying is indeed true, he starts off as a very corrupt cop, and he goes in there with bad intentions, kind of on the advice of this Thompson / crude detective who probably just wanted it for his own agenda or something else. But by the end, he's kind of cut ties with that, and that's the important thing I wanted to point out here. There'll be a part 2, and there's more to discuss on the character of Leon Kennedy. Thank you. And this other part is just kind of a part that people had requested about the topic of Resident Evil overall. And so I can't say that myself I'm too into Resident Evil, really, because, overall I'm more of a 2D kind of aficionado as far as video games go. So I remember back when the original Streets of Rage came out, and that one is a golden legend to me. The original Golden Axe, the original Double Dragon, for sure. Super Mario World, Zelda Link to the Past, all these great originals, even the original Mask video games. So I'm more of a 2D purist in that sense. But I will say, on the subject of Resident Evil, I've always enjoyed Resident Evil, but honestly, folks, I don't particularly get the story. Like, I don't like the story that much. That's not ever why I played Resident Evil. I just have to be honest about it. I didn't see the kind of the qualities of the story that other people saw. And people might think differently. They might think, well, it's a very, very realistic story. Well, you'd be surprised. I mean, if you went to places like Louisiana, South Carolina, etc., there are similar things that have occurred there, but not at all the same level as what goes on in Resident Evil. But the question was, what would be your favorite character in Resident Evil overall? And if I was to choose one, a single character that I like in Resident Evil kind of overall, my favorite character, believe it or not, is one that a lot of people like, but I'm not really big on the character for some reason, for what other people think about it. But my favorite character in Resident Evil is definitely Chris Redfield. And the reason that I like Chris Redfield the most, and I'll be honest about it, is I feel like Chris Redfield is really the underdog in a lot of the Resident Evil story. With everything that's going on with Valentine and with Wesker and what Wesker has to do and all these different ways he has to kind of twist and turn all the motives around to make it be about him and what happens. Chris Redfield is kind of the guy who's just doing things because he knows it's the right way, and he's got to do them, or else it's going to be, just calamities happening and similar things. And so I like Chris Redfield the most because he's more of the underdog. And when I look at Leon Kennedy, Kennedy especially, and these other characters, Tofu, the other one I think was named Nemesis, all these other characters, they are just in it for themselves if they can possibly survive this post-apocalyptic wasteland. It's kind of a little stretch of the imagination already, because if it's going to be post-apocalyptic, it's going to be more like The Walking Dead. It's not ever going to be anything like Resident Evil, so to speak, in that way, thankfully. But I mean, aside from the fact it's just a video game, and it's a very interesting video game and an important one, I see Chris Redfield as kind of the star of the show because he's an underdog who doesn't take all of this seriously about what's going on at these companies that are doing all these experiments and so on. He just tries to keep his head down. So I like him for a reason that other people kind of don't get Chris Redfield. I like him because he's more the underdog, and in the way that he portrays himself overall in the story, he just wants to get through it. He doesn't care who ends up getting control of the prototype. He doesn't care about any of those things like Kennedy and these other people on Stars care about and so on. Chris Redfield just cares about getting through it in one piece, and having his sister there. And so, to be honest, that's kind of the main reason I've always liked Christopher Redfield the most, because he seems to be in it ultimately for the right reasons, and he knows everything that's going on, and in spite of what's going on, he's doing the right thing. And I hope that a lot of folks would react in a similar way to how Chris Redfield ultimately reacts, because he realizes the situation for what it is, and he does, what's necessary, kind of in the context to what has to happen. And Kennedy and the others, they do what you would expect. They make it all about themselves, and they kind of create chaos a little bit, kind of similar to the way the Wesker does. And so I always like Chris Redfield for some reason the most for that reason. He's very easy to like as kind of the downtrodden character, the one that nobody gets. They always kind of try to ignore him. They ignore kind of what his analysis is overall in the end too, which is a mistake. So I really like him. I like the other guy, Barry. I like him as well, believe it or not. That's a rare one that people talk about a lot, is Barry from the first Resident Evil. So Chris Redfield and Barry, Barry for all his faults, those would be my overall number one picks for the Resident Evil franchise. I can't think of a character that I like more than the original Chris Redfield, and a little bit of him rubbed off on Jill Valentine, so I gotta give Capcom credit for that. And definitely Barry. For everything that happened with Barry, he's gold, because he realizes, the apocalypse and similar things that is going on doesn't have to be about his life. And he starts changing, I would say, kind of in the midway point. But we never see Leon Kennedy. We never see any of the other characters really change. And so that's why I'll say it'll always be Redfield for me. Thank you again. Good luck, guys. Of course, the other positive aspect that I mentioned about it, at least in the remake, is Leon seems to show a lot more compassion for Ada and for Birkin. And at least for some of the people when coming out of there, that wasn't really that clear in the original storyline. It definitely wasn't clear in the first game on Dreamcast and on the Xbox as well. So there's a lot of changes. I mean, he shapes into a better character, but Still, I have to admit that there are a number of rough edges to Leon in the overall beginning of the story before Resident Evil 4, and he still shows some real reckless disregard for Sherry and for different things that are going on. I think he tries to kind of do the right thing, but again, he's also running against the clock, I guess you could say. And the virus is causing all these different things going on that we aren't really aware of as players. So he's not doing the best job of it. And I don't think that Ada is as bad of a character as they say, although what she does after to Leon is really quite unforgivable. I don't think that was cool at all. But I don't think she's as bad as they say as a character. I definitely don't think Shelley or Claire are that bad. So I do believe that it was, especially in my opinion, unnecessary for Leon to manipulate them or basically to crash the squad cars. And I get that he might not have crashed one of the squad cars deliberately, but all the same, he was dealing with all this kooky stuff with Schrader so much. He did destroy pretty easily all the squad cars and the cargo plane that they were going to use to offload the virus and get everyone safe from that horrible outbreak. And so overall, I don't think that Leon Kennedy did a very good job. And I'm just being brutally honest. There's a lot of people who think this way when really playing the storyline. I don't think that he did a very good job overall in the first part of this Resident Evil series. I think he showed a lot of reckless actions that could have been handled so much better and clearer in not leading Jill Valentine on about a relationship and not leading Ada Wong on about a relationship and just in general not manipulating some of the people he came in contact with. I think that because of Salazar and different things like you see here, he got off on the wrong track. He had some real problems with his original family, I would say, growing up, that just didn't quite get resolved. And so he starts out, he's not really that good of a cop, but by Resident Evil 4, I do agree, he's turned it around and he's much more presentable and definitely a good guy at that point. And I'm not going to point out and say that he was ever a bad guy, but I am going to point out he made a huge amount of mistakes. Those mistakes costed a lot of people's lives, and we can't ever forget the fact he did destroy the station kind of outside of Antarctica and blew up 2 of the helicopters, killing everybody inside each of the helicopters. You know, there was a lot of people he showed some disregard for, and he was very, very reckless. So even though he was getting over the situation with Schrader, he showed a lot of reckless actions that I don't think most beginning cops in his situation would ever show, because I don't think that they would ever want that on their record at all. But he's a fictional character, and so I'm trying to give it a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But he is far from what they portray him being as some kind of hero. And in Resident Evil 4 and the later ones, I'd agree he becomes kind of a hero at that point. But in the beginning of the series, he is not any hero. And anyone who would say that, I have to be honest, folks, has not truly played this franchise. They need to play it with not an interest just in getting at the zombies, but they need to play it with an interest in getting to know the characters. That's where I came from when I really started dissecting certain things. And that's where I learned a lot. And so there's a lot that we all can learn and learn further from when you play Resident Evil and you kind of study the characters. Thank you once again. There will be more. So again, folks, it's not usual because this is a true crime related channel. The majority of the content is always true crime. But I view Resident Evil, something like that, as a kind of work of art. And I felt impressed to be able to do this for you guys. I enjoyed doing it. Imagine what can be done once I get independent team really involved in this. But if you liked it, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and spread the videos. Thank you. There's always new surprises coming up.